The wind that evening carried more than dust. It had the dry, cracked voice of something unsaid, something rotting in the belly of the earth. At exactly 7:14 p.m., Daisy Ray Harper stepped barefoot onto the back porch of Sundown Ranch, a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand. Her blonde braid swung gently over her shoulder. Her mother, Miranda, remembered the moment well, not because of anything special, but because it was so ordinary. Daisy smiled. Be back before dark. Those were the last words her mother ever heard from her. Sheriff Clay Langston had seen his fair share of runaway teens. Most came back after a weekend of sulking in a boyfriend's truck or crashing on a friend's couch. But something about Daisy's case didn't sit right. She'd left her phone on the kitchen table. No bag, no wallet, not even shoes. And she'd walked toward the barn, the pasture, the southern trails, any of which could spit you out into miles of wilderness, or worse, the Old Wash Ravine. The ranch covered 140 acres of fenced terrain. Coyotes, sinkholes, and rattlers weren't unheard of, but Daisy Ray was no fool. She knew this land like it was sewn into her skin. When she didn't come back by nightfall, Miranda called everyone, friends, neighbors, even her ex-husband. By dawn, the pasture was covered in boot prints and flashlight beams. But Daisy was gone. They called it that. The Whisper Fence, a stretch of rusting wire deep in the southern acreage where cowboys swore they'd hear things at dusk. Wind that whistled like voices. Footsteps in brittle grass with no body to match. It was there that they found the first clue. One of Daisy's hair ties, bright blue against the dirt. Sheriff Clay bagged it, even though it could have been weeks old. Beside it, a small square of fabric snagged on the barbed wire. Pale pink, possibly from the tank top Daisy was last seen in. The dogs picked up her scent past the fence. But just half a mile later, they stopped, turning in circles, whining, as if the trail had been swallowed whole. 2 days into the search, Sheriff Langston interviewed all the ranch hands. Most were seasonal workers, Spanish-speaking men, who kept their heads down and noses clean, except for one, Ty Bronson, 22, muscular, cocky. He was new, came on 2 weeks before Daisy vanished. Said he'd worked horses in Montana, but no one could find a reference to prove it. Ty said he hadn't seen her that evening. I was up at the north paddock repairing fencing. Ask anyone. But his alibi had cracks. No one remembered seeing him until after sundown, and he had scratches on his arm he said were from barbed wire. When the sheriff asked him why he didn't help with the search the first night, Ty shrugged. Didn't think it was that serious. She probably ran off, right? Wrong answer. Miranda was never a religious woman. But 3 days after Daisy vanished, she found herself sitting in the dusty pews of the tiny white chapel off Highway 19. Pastor Lena Hughes, silver-haired and sun-wrinkled, approached her quietly after the sermon. I know you're hurting, child, but there's something you should know. She handed Miranda a faded photograph. A girl, blonde, barefoot, standing in the same field Daisy once played in, but this photo was decades old. That's Abigail Rusk, the pastor said. Went missing in 1983. Same spot, same story. No trace. Miranda's blood ran cold. No one ever told me. The pastor nodded grimly. They never do. Sundown Ranch eats its daughters. On the 5th day, a storm rolled in. Not just of clouds and lightning, but of press vans and conspiracy theorists. TikTok videos popped up claiming Daisy was abducted by a cult. Others swore it was a trafficking ring, citing nearby truck stops. Some even mentioned the Bone Trail, a rumored underground tunnel network from pioneer days. While media swarmed the gates, a forensics team combed the barn. Near the back, beneath a rotted floorboard, they found a stain. Blood. Too much for a nosebleed. Too fresh to be old. But still no body. DNA confirmed it. Daisy Ray Harper. Now it was no longer a missing person case. It was a potential homicide. Miranda hadn't always been a rancher's wife. She'd grown up in Chicago, met her ex at rodeo, and married too young. Daisy had been the only good thing that came out of it. After the divorce, she kept the ranch. Daisy loved it, said it was her place to breathe. But what Miranda never told anyone was that Daisy had started asking questions. About an old ledger she found in the attic. About girls who had worked the ranch in the 60s and 80s. Names scratched out. Payments marked final. And then there was the journal. Daisy's private thoughts. In the last entry, she wrote, "There's something wrong here. Like the land remembers. I heard it whisper last night. I think it wants me." Miranda never showed that page to the sheriff. Not yet. Before police could officially name Ty Bronson a suspect, he vanished. His truck was found in a ditch 20 miles north, keys still in ignition, blood on the dashboard. Nobody. Locals began whispering. Maybe Daisy wasn't the only one the ranch had taken. Maybe it wasn't just men hurting girls. Maybe it was something older, something buried. Sheriff Langston didn't believe in curses, but he had seen enough to know when logic gave out. 7 days after she vanished, Daisy's horse, Tangle, was found grazing near the Whisper fence. Tied to its saddle was a red ribbon. Daisy's, the same one she wore to the town fair last summer. Under the ribbon was a note, scrawled in charcoal on torn canvas. "She's not gone. She's below." The sheriff ordered ground scans. Thermal, radar, even cadaver dogs. Nothing, but Miranda didn't sleep. She returned every night to that fence, listening to the wind, waiting for the whisper. And then, on the 8th night, she heard it. A voice. Faint. "Mom." It wasn't the police who found her. It was Miranda. With her own 2 hands, she dug beneath the roots of the oak tree beside the Whisper fence. 6 feet down, her shovel struck metal. An old storm shelter, forgotten by time, or maybe buried on purpose. Inside was Daisy, alive, weak, shivering, but alive. She had bruises, dehydration, and a wild look in her eyes. "She kept me there," she whispered, once safe. "The lady in white. She said I had to pay for what my family did." "What are you talking about?" Miranda asked. Daisy just said one word. "Abigail." The ledger, once dismissed as a ranch book, told stories older than anyone knew. It listed girls who had served on the ranch. Many were indentured, others bought. Miranda traced it back. The original Harper patriarch, Daisy's great-grandfather, had run a trafficking operation in the 1940s. Girls disappeared, buried as debts. And now, it seemed, the land remembered. Each generation, it took one girl, unless someone stopped it. Miranda burned the ledger under the blood moon, while Daisy watched from the porch wrapped in blankets. The wind howled. The oak tree cracked down its middle. And just like that, the whispers stopped. Sheriff Langston closed the case. Ty Bronson was never found. Abigail's name was etched on the town's memorial. Daisy refused interviews. She didn't speak publicly again for 6 months. It happened exactly 364 days after Daisy Ray Harper was pulled from the old storm shelter. The air felt heavier that day, as if the sky itself was pressing down on Sundown Ranch. Even the cattle stood uneasy, their eyes drawn toward the southern fields. That night, Miranda Harper jolted awake to the sound of screams, not from Daisy's room, but from outside. When she flung open the door, the wind hit her like a wall, dry, bitter, and carrying something it shouldn't. Children's laughter, echoing from the Whisper fence. Daisy stood in the yard barefoot, her arms outstretched, eyes rolled back white as bone. She whispered one word before collapsing. "Abigail." Daisy never spoke about what happened in that shelter. A few therapists came and went. One tried regression therapy. Daisy bit him. Since then, she'd been quiet, mostly homeschooled, withdrawn. But after that night, something shifted. She started sleepwalking, standing for hours at the oak tree, digging in the dirt with her fingers. Miranda tried to chalk it up to trauma. Night terrors. PTSD. But then the drawing started. Hundreds of pages. All the same image. A girl in white, eyes missing, standing behind Daisy's bed. And in every drawing, that same sentence, scrawled in charcoal. "You were supposed to stay." Sheriff Clay Langston had never truly closed the case. Ty Bronson's truck remained impounded. His blood matched DNA found in the barn, but there was still no body, no proof of guilt. Langston made one last visit to the storm shelter Miranda had unearthed. It was different now. Cold, stale, and then he saw it. Fresh footprints in the dust. Boot prints. Too large to be Daisy's. Too new to be from a year ago, and scratched into the inside of the hatch. She's not who she seems. A new ranch hand arrived. Ezekiel Zeke Kane, tall, tan, and quiet, said he'd grown up in New Mexico. No references, but he worked cheap. Miranda didn't want to hire anyone. But after Daisy's relapse, they needed help. Bills were piling. Livestock needed tending. Zeke took to the land quickly. Too quickly. Knew things about the fence. Knew the history. Land remembers what you bury, he said one evening, sipping coffee. What do you mean? Miranda asked. Zeke smiled without warmth. Just that some ghosts aren't dead. They're just patient. That night, Daisy woke up screaming. She pointed out the window. He's here again. Miranda brought in a contractor to fix the creaking under the living room floor. The boards had begun to bow, like something underneath was pushing up. When they pulled the wood, they found it. A pit. Old bones. Dozens of them. Children's shoes. Torn dresses. And a locket. Inside, a photo of Abigail Rusk. And beneath it, a tiny engraved date. October 31st, 1983. The day Abigail vanished. Sheriff Langston ordered the house sealed. Forensics came and went, but no one could answer the biggest question. Who buried them? Daisy's journal had remained untouched since her rescue. Until now, one page, dated only with a symbol, a sun cut in half, was written in ink so black it seemed to bleed. She offered me a way out. A trade. She said I could live if I promised to bring her another. One like me. Blood-bound to the land. She says the land is hungry. It always was. And it needs Harper blood. Miranda's hands trembled. Daisy had survived. But what had she agreed to? Across town, two sisters, 9-year-old twins Maddie and McAllister, vanished from their home. Back doors wide open. No signs of struggle. Their parents found a note pinned to the barn wall, in childlike handwriting. One won't be enough. Panic tore through the town. People began whispering again. Was the Harper girl cursed? Was the ranch feeding? And when Langston visited Daisy to question her, she wouldn't speak. She just drew a picture. 2 stick-figure girls. One upside down, the other buried, and in the sky above them, a dark figure, faceless, with antlers like tree branches. One night, Miranda saw Zeke standing by the whisper fence, not smoking, not leaning, just standing, utterly still, staring into the dark. She called out. He turned, but it wasn't Zeke. His eyes were completely black. No whites, just bottomless pits. He smiled, and when he spoke, his voice was not his. It echoed with many. The pact was broken. Now it will be remade. Then he vanished. No one in town saw Zeke Kane again. The front door was wide open. Just like last time, Daisy was gone. But this time, there was no storm. Only silence. On her bed, a single red ribbon. This one soaked in something dark. And in her closet, scrawled in her own handwriting. She said, I'm hers now. Miranda screamed so loud, neighbors came running. Sheriff Langston issued another Amber Alert. But this time, no dogs to track her. No trace. No scent. It was as if Daisy Ray Harper had never returned. Miranda went back to the storm shelter. It was sealed now, filled in with dirt and stone. But she dug. She dug like a mad woman until her fingers bled. And at the bottom, beneath layers of compacted clay, she found something new. A staircase. Descending. Winding. Carved with symbols she didn't recognize. She took a flashlight and began to descend. The air grew colder. The walls breathed. And somewhere far below, she heard a girl's voice. I'm sorry. I let her in. The light flickered, then died, and something whispered from the darkness. One more. Just one more. The match died with a hiss. but the echo stayed. Miranda froze in the dark. Around her, dozens of soft breaths filled the space. Then movement, bare feet shifting over stone. She lit another match. The flame flickered, and now she saw them clearly. Girls, young, pale, eyes pitch black, as if hollowed from within. Daisy stood among them, wearing the same dress she vanished in, though it looked decades older. Yellowed, frayed. "Mom," she said softly, "you shouldn't have come." Miranda's hand shook. "What is this place?" Daisy tilted her head. "The root, the debt, the beginning." Then all the girls spoke together, in one sickening, synchronized whisper. "Welcome to Hollow." A dim light flickered deeper in the cave. Miranda stepped forward, but the girls blocked her path, except one. She was older than the others. Taller, long blonde hair like cobwebs. And her eyes weren't black. Not fully. They shimmered between shadow and light. "I remember you," she said. "You used to play here, before they made you forget." Miranda's heart stuttered. "Who are you?" The girl smiled gently. "Sadly, I'm Abigail." Miranda staggered back. "That's not possible." But it was. The bone structure, the locket, the voice she'd heard on the wind. It was her. Abigail took her hand. It felt cold and impossibly light. "They'd buried us, Miranda, one girl each generation, in exchange for prosperity, for survival. Your family started it." "My family?" "Your grandfather signed the pact. The land was dying. He promised daughters." Miranda gasped. "That's not true." Abigail leaned in. "Then why did you bury Daisy the first time?" Memories crashing like a flood. A thunderstorm. Daisy, age 7, standing near the whisper fence. Her eyes rolled back. Her voice speaks in a different tongue. A voice telling Miranda, "You have to choose." And she did. She drugged her daughter, led her to the shelter, locked it from the outside. But afterward, she forgot, or made herself forget. The mind protects itself from horror. "Your line was chosen," Abigail said. But Daisy broke the cycle when she survived. The other girls hissed softly, their voices like wind through dead trees. She cheated. Now the land is angry. It demands more. At the center of the hollow stood a massive tree, its roots twisting through stone and bone. It pulsed, alive. "The black root," Abigail whispered. "It's the heart. Feed it, and it gives life. Deny it, and it takes what it wants." Miranda looked at the roots. They pulsed like veins. One had a small pink ribbon tangled around it. Daisies. "I can end this," Miranda said. "I'll burn it." Abigail stepped back. "You'll only make it hungrier." But Miranda didn't care. She lit the torch from her matchbook and lunged. The flame touched the root, and the hollow screamed. At that same moment, Sheriff Langston was standing on Miranda's porch. He had received a call from a neighbor. "The land's shaking, Sheriff. I swear to God, it's breathing." Then the ground split near the whisper fence. Smoke billowed. A hole opened, vomiting heat and the sound of howling voices. Langston stepped back as something clawed its way out. Not Daisy, not Miranda, but something else. Something wearing Zeke Kane's face. The torch had collapsed half the cavern. Abigail shoved Miranda down a side tunnel, whispering urgently, "Go now. Save her." "Save who?" "Your daughter." "But you're—" "I'm not meant to leave." "She still can." Miranda turned one last time. Abigail smiled. "Tell the others. Let us be remembered." Then the earth swallowed her. Miranda crawled for what felt like miles. At the end of the tunnel, a metal grate. She burst through it, into the barn, and there, curled in a pile of hay, was Daisy, shivering. Human. Miranda wrapped her daughter in her arms. But Daisy whispered, "You didn't save me. You woke it." Over the next few days, strange things happened in town. Birds fell dead from the sky. Cows gave birth to stillborn calves with extra eyes. People went missing, then returned, but changed. Their eyes, not quite right. Whispers came from drains, from walls, from the wind. Langston tried to keep order, but the town was fraying. And in the center of it all, the land around Sundown Ranch turned black, charred, as if cursed. Late one night, Daisy drew again. This time, not just girls, men, women, townspeople, all being pulled underground by root-like arms. She turned to Miranda. The hollow's not underground anymore. It's coming up. And then she handed her mother a page. A map, a mark in red. Here, she whispered. It wants one more Harper. Miranda stared at the mark. It wasn't the whisper fence. It was a family cemetery. At the cemetery, Miranda dug up the grave of her grandmother, Emma Harper, born 1901, died 1947. But when she reached the coffin, it was empty. Only a note. Blood buys time. You owe a second payment. That night, Daisy vanished again. But this time, there was no door left open. No tracks. Just one word etched into the barn wall. Soon. Langston finally cracked. He gathered fuel, crosses, and guns. He told the town to prepare for war. We've lived under a lie. The Harpers cursed this land, and we've let it fester. At midnight, he led a group to the ranch. Torches lit the horizon, but the land fought back. Trees bled. Wind carried voices. One man walked into a pond and never came out. Langston made it to the barn, kicked down the door, found Miranda on her knees, and Daisy levitating above the ground, her eyes glowing. She's the gate now, Miranda said. She's what? She didn't escape. She became one. The wind stopped. Everything went still. And then from Daisy's mouth, a voice spoke. You try to bury your debt, but blood remembers. The air split open. The blackroot burst from the floor. Langston opened fire, but bullets passed through. And then the tree spoke again. One more Harper. One final root. Then silence. Miranda stepped forward, knife in hand. If I go, she said, will you release her? Daisy hovered lower, eyes dimming. The wind slowed. Then a nod. Abigail's voice, soft, echoed behind her. You can end it, Miranda. Let feed one last time. She pressed the blade to her palm. But before she could act, Daisy screamed. No, it's lying. Sundown Ranch no longer looked like part of the world. Smoke bled from the soil. Livestock stood frozen in fields, eyes glossy and gray. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, forming archways of bark and bone. In town, chaos ruled. Families fled. Water turned black in wells. Children whispered names they'd never been taught. Sheriff Clay Langston was missing. His badge was found in the shape of a spiral, burned into the hood of his cruiser outside Miranda's house. Inside, Miranda faced her nightmare. One sat sobbing in the corner, dirt under her fingernails, trembling. The other stood still, smiling. Miranda's knife was still in her hand. Tell me your favorite story, Miranda asked. The sobbing Daisy answered first. When I broke my arm jumping from the hayloft, and you stayed up with me watching Charlotte's Web. The smiling Daisy tilted her head. That wasn't her favorite. Yours was when Dad used to sing off-key while feeding the calves. She spoke softly, too softly. Miranda felt the knife grow heavier in her hand. Tell me what happened down there, she said. Both girls answered. One said, I prayed for you. The other, I listened. And then, she's not real. I am. From both. That night, someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. Miranda opened the door with the knife behind her back. Standing there, Pastor Lena Hughes. Eyes hollow, Bible in hand. I came to help, she said, voice crackling like dry leaves. The hollow cannot be reasoned with, but it can be obeyed. Miranda stepped back. You knew this whole time. I did. I tried to forget. But forgetting is a privilege only the cursed enjoy. She stepped inside, gaze drifting to the girls. You have until sunrise, she said. Choose one. Bury the other, or the land chooses for you. The girls began to change. The crying one spoke of memories Miranda never shared aloud, like the blue ribbon from her miscarriage. The The scar on her ankle from falling off the swing as a child. The smiling one knew songs Miranda hadn't sung in 20 years. She played piano notes in perfect harmony, but when she slept, she whispered in Latin, and sometimes her shadow didn't move with her. Miranda found herself watching them both with suspicion, then fear, then guilt, until she broke. I can't do this. But the walls of the ranch creaked in response. You already did. Miranda found a chest in the attic. Locked. Inside, letters from Emma Harper, her grandmother. One read, "We fed the land because it gave us life. One child spared many. But the debt was never clean. They come back wrong." Another, "I kept twins. One for me, one for the hollow. I chose wrong. And my real daughter burned in the nursery fire. The thing I kept survived. It learned to smile." Miranda dropped a letter. Twins. Always twins? Was Daisy a twin? That night, Abigail appeared in the mirror, not as a ghost, but as reflection. She whispered, "You think you're choosing between them, but really, you're choosing between yourself." Miranda leaned in. "I don't understand." "You do. You were the twin once. One sent away. One kept. The curse skips until one chooses." The mirror cracked. "You were never the first sacrifice, but you may be the last." Pastor Lena returned before dawn with 5 townspeople, silent, gaunt-eyed, and bearing torches. They brought with them the blackroot sapling, now grown into a small, twisted tree. One daisy reached for Miranda's hand. "Please, Mom." The other stepped forward, arms open. "I forgive you." The ground shook. Time was out. A hole open in the floorboards. Black, breathing. Miranda turned to crowd. "Which one do I choose?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "You already know." Miranda knelt before them, looked each girl in the eyes. Tears rolled down her face. "I love you." To both. Then she handed the knife to the crying Daisy. "Use it." The girl blinked. "What?" "If you're real, if you're my daughter, you'll know who to kill." The smiling Daisy grinned. The crying one shook. I was trembling. Then lunged. The knife fell. The smiling girl collapsed, stabbed to the stomach. Black smoke hissed from the wound. The town exhaled. For a moment, peace. Then Miranda heard it. A giggle from behind her. She turned. The crying girl, now standing. Eyes black. Mouth stretching wider than a child should. "I knew you'd pick me." The town erupted in chaos. Roots burst through homes. Fields cracked open. Townsfolk screamed as voices filled the skies. The blackroot had fed, but not on sacrifice, on choice. It didn't want obedience. It wanted despair. It wanted belief. Miranda screamed into sky. "I gave you what you wanted." The hollow answered through Daisy's voice. "No, you gave me what you feared." In the storm cellar, beneath layers of wood and earth, the real Daisy lay, alive, unconscious, preserved. Abigail had hidden her. A whisper from the wind led Miranda there. She found her daughter curled like a seed, heartbeat faint, cradled in twisted roots. She pulled her out. Eyes fluttered. "Mom!" Then, "Where's the other me?" Miranda looked up. The land was burning. Miranda carried Daisy into the dawn. But standing at the gate of Sundown Ranch were 2 more girls, identical, silent, and behind them Sheriff Langston, eyes black, badge glowing. He raised a hand, spoke one word, "Begin," and the sky opened. The 2 girls at the ranch gate didn't speak. They didn't move. They were identical, but not to Daisy. They were older. Miranda stared at them, heart pounding, and behind them, Sheriff Clay Langston, his eyes black, lips split wide in an unnatural grin. He stepped forward. "You brought her out," he said, "but you forgot what goes and must come out twisted." The sky above the ranch churned like water. Clouds rotated in a spiral. A giant circle burned over the house. The broken circle. "Do you remember the first pact?" Langston asked. "I was never told," Miranda said. "No," he said. "You were never meant to remember." He raised his hand. The ground split open. Miranda fell through the earth. But she didn't land in the hollow. She landed in the past. The year, 1891. The ranch looked new. Virgin land. And at the center of it stood a man in a brown coat and wide hat. Nathaniel Harper, the first of the Harper line. He stood at a stone altar, his hands bloody. At his feet, a girl, still, pale. Miranda screamed, but no one heard her. She was a ghost in this memory, a shadow in time. A book sat open beside Nathaniel, its pages inked in Latin and something much darker. The land is blood. The land is bone. Feed it and you own it. Miranda knelt before the girl, Abigail, the original, and she watched as Nathaniel offered her blood to the roots beneath. Back in the present, Daisy stirred in Miranda's arms. "There, try open the first hollow," she whispered. The first, the original root, before the shelter, before the barn, beneath the altar. Miranda remembered the altar from a vision, a jagged circle of stone, hidden deep in the southern pasture. That's where they had to go. But the path was already opening, straight through the heart of the ranch. At sunset, they came, townsfolk, possessed, eyes black, mouths stitched shut by barbed thread. They carried symbols, twisted crosses, melted clocks, dolls with no eyes. In front walked Sheriff Langston, and behind him, Zeke Kane, his body rotten, skin peeling, but still walking. Daisy whispered, "The hollow wears the dead to remember the living." The procession circled the ranch, chanting without sound. Then they stopped, waiting for the sacrifice. Miranda remembered the book from the vision, the one Nathaniel used to summon the hollow. She went to the attic, dug behind the old fireplace. And there it was, wrapped in canvas. Bound in leather that didn't feel like leather. The root book. Daisy flinched at its touch. Miranda opened it. Pages were blank, until her blood dripped on them from a paper cut. Then ink appeared. Images of every Harper girl lost. A final blank page. And a sentence. The circle breaks when blood feeds backward. Miranda and Daisy reached the altar at dawn. It was cold, older than time. The black root pulsed beneath it, splitting the soil. The procession followed. Langston and the twins now glowing from the eyes. Miranda raised the root book. "I know what you want." Langston smiled. "Then you know it can't be undone." "Maybe not," she said, "but it can be reversed." She pressed her hand to the altar, recited the words from the book. A spiral formed beneath her feet. Then everything inverted. All around them, the ground opened. Girls emerged. Not ghosts, not monsters. Victims. Abigail stepped forward. So did others. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The altar cracked. The twins screamed. Langston roared as the skin peeled away, revealing tree bark underneath. Zeke collapsed into black dust. Miranda looked at Daisy. "Now." They both pressed their hands into the altar. "We give you back your children." The broken circle above imploded. The procession dropped. Some wept. Some died. Others simply vanished. The black root screamed, through wind, through air, through blood. Then it tore itself out of the earth. A tree as tall as the sky. And it burned, bright, screaming, until it was gone. When Miranda woke, Daisy was gone. Only her shoe remained, tied in the red ribbon. Abigail stood beside her. "You broke the circle." "Then why did I lose her?" Abigail looked down. "Because the land always takes a price." Years passed. Sundown Ranch regrew, but nothing grew in the southern field. The altar was gone. The sky stopped spiraling. But Miranda never stopped looking. Until one night, under a moonless sky, she heard a knock. 3 knocks. At the door, a girl, dirty, thin, hair tangled, red ribbon in her hair. "Mom!" Miranda dropped the lantern. But when she reached the door, no one was there. Just a root, black, still pulsing, and a whisper from beneath. "She's with me now." In a new town, far away, a farmer plants a tree. A child goes missing a week later. And deep below in the dirt, a heartbeat echoes. The root book lies closed in a box nearby, until a new name appears on its blank final page. Harper, to be continued,